in ITS. His citation for the ITS Congress Hall of Fame read, "He is an effective and charismatic champion and thought leader, and has been for ITS for over 25 years. He spent 6 years, I think, working for Xerox, but he's now out on his own. Richard, we look forward to you being charismatic and thought leading.
My pleasure. Okay, I think it's back to reality now after that lovely presentation. My local authority can't even fill the potholes in, let alone do 3D imagery of everywhere. Anyway, I'm going to talk about how local authorities should participate in mobility as a service. I would like to point out that my personal goal in life when it comes to business is to unlock the community-wide benefits of ITS. And as an ITS industry for the last 25, 30 years, we've absolutely failed to do that. And sometimes that means I've lost my job, and that's life, so life carries on. It seems to me that mobility as a service gives us the opportunity to join up where ITS has failed to join up so far. So some of these slides will probably be repeats of things you've seen over the last 2 days, so when they are, just whiz through them. So talking about the authorities, their job, they're responsible for serving their community. That's what they have to do. They set and pursue policy outcomes in order to serve that community. However, they're constrained by old administrative boundaries, and transport and environmental pollution doesn't respect those. So some of the administrative jurisdictional boundaries we've got make no sense. In this country, we're seeing changes. Transport for London, joining up all those boroughs, looking after the main roads. Transport for Greater Manchester, initiatives in the North East and the North West and the West Midlands. So small authorities beginning to work together in transportation because it makes more sense. They also subsidise public transport services because they have this responsibility to the community. And they have contractual agreements with mobility providers, including bus companies, car park operators, and so on. So they are in a position to influence the people who would need to be involved in mobility as a service. But most of all, it's the authorities that have their hands on the levers that can make a difference. So if, for instance, we achieve an effective increase in road capacity, unless we measure and identify that increase, we won't be in a position to decide how to spend it. If you identify the increase, you then can maybe give more time to pedestrians or to buses or to trucks or to push bikes. But unless you identify the benefits, they'll just fill up with cars. So my proposal is that the authorities need to be involved so that they're aware of the changes that are happening, and they're not at the moment. At the moment, companies like Parkopedia, anybody from Parkopedia in the room? No. They have no regard for the quality of any information coming from a local authority. They collect it and do it themselves. Very soon, Mercedes vehicles will be driving around our networks, being able to identify empty parking spaces and report that back. So all of this is happening all over the place, well, it will be, without the authorities actually being engaged and involved. So going back to my mission, community benefits of ITS. Every ITS initiative, demonstration, pilot has one thing in common. The hardest thing to do is to solve the administrative and organisational aspects. Forget the technology, it's routine. It's people defending their budgets, defending their areas of responsibility, and being able to work in a different way, because ITS always makes you work in a different way. So we see these lovely images of the future cities with a happy couple walking hand in hand through a green ex-car park. This is what our cities are like. These are real cities. People on motorbikes with all their kids on board. people in China getting rid of their bikes and buying as many cars as they can. This one is, can you still hear me? Still hear me? Yeah. Can you still hear me? Yeah. This is Moscow, control center in Moscow. So that's traffic jams in Moscow. That's New York, of course. So this is what our cities are like. Okay, you've had your lunch, so now I'll wake you up. What can you see? What do you see in this picture on the left?
Congestion.
Thank you. Congestion. Come on, wake up.
Emissions.
Pardon? Emissions, pollution. Yep.
Efficient use of capacity.
Efficient use of capacity. Okay, lovely. Okay. I'm going to give up on you lot.
Opportunity seeking.
You see all that stuff, but what you're really seeing, well, no, you're not seeing it, I'm seeing it. What I'm really seeing is that there are people inside those vehicles, and there are goods inside those trucks, and it's people that we have to influence. They're the ones that we have to make change the way they behave. So never forget, all of this is all about people. And on the right, these are happy people using an effective public transport system.
100% capacity.
And it's at capacity. So what we can do with mobility as a service is we can put even more people in there, can't we? Brilliant. Okay, so this is it's not actually my first ever car, but it's the same model. Anybody know what this is? Ford Anglia 105E. But what makes it special? It's an estate, but it's a deluxe. It's a deluxe. A deluxe, okay? So this was the first car that Ford made that you could buy a deluxe. So I was driving the dream. I had a second-hand one in 1970. Mine was a 1963. But I was driving the dream. I had a deluxe. And that's what the motor industry have been selling us ever since. They haven't been selling us mobility. They've been selling us a deluxe model. So, this is about data. ITS is all about data. And this is my view of how ITS can provide the transport element of a smart city. So forget all the sewerage and stuff. That's done by some company called, what did you call them this morning? Conduit, was it? Yeah, okay. So this is about data. Now, how many people have been into a traffic control centre? Brilliant. How many people, when they went in, the first question the operator said was, what's the traffic like? It always used to be, but people are more confident nowadays. Okay? So they know what's going on. And they know what's going on because we've got monitoring. So monitoring means you're collecting information on all of the networks. So it can be from sensors, floating car data, which are vehicles traveling around the network picking up information, video, CCTV, social media, any source you can find, crowdsourcing, anything. And what we're looking for is to understand what's happening with incidents, congestion, air quality, and the capacity. Now take that information and analyze it in what we call a mobility analytics platform and turn it into two things. Information to help you manage all of the systems in the city and the region to make them work better, and information to help people make better decisions on how they travel. And also make it available as open data. I've been saying for 30 years, authorities should invest in ITS. Well, there comes a time when you say stop. Don't build it yourself. Make the data available and somebody else will provide those services for you. And it's more efficient because the best app survives. So this is my view of how we should be managing data in order to feed all of the services and applications in order to enable people to move better. And the key things are here at the bottom. So you need a business case to make sure that you can keep running it. You need to be filling and hitting the policy objectives of the region. You need to meet the user needs, have key performance indicators so you can measure how you're doing, and of course, governance. And this comes back to the fact that this could be run by anybody. It doesn't need to be run by the authority, but I propose that they should always be involved in the governance because they got their hands on the levers. Still with me? Good. Yeah. So, mobility as a service. You need a few things. You need a front-end app, which people think is quite easy, and there are lots of images of them we've seen already. You need a mobility companion, so a trip planner. And that's really tricky. It sounds simple, trip planner, yeah. There are so many different ways of traveling, so many combinations, that to provide people with the right information is really complicated. And to make that dynamic and up-to-date is even more complicated. It's a continuing commitment to provide quality information so that people can trust it. We'll talk a little bit about a mobility marketplace, similar to the one like the one in Denver, but one that really functions, so where you can actually book and make the transactions. You need an accounting system so that you can pay, and we heard from the chat from Barclaycard that, was it MasterCard? Barclaycard? MasterCard? MasterCard, yeah, that they might be able to do that. And of course you need back office processing, because it's the back office which is really the hub of how you manage and control the data. So this is probably not news to you. When MaaS emerged a couple of years ago, this is what people said. Seamless, efficient flow of information, goods, people, locally and long distance. So it can do everything everywhere. Globally scalable. You don't need to own a car. It would be better than owning a car. And it will produce an open ecosystem for information and services in intelligent transportation. Lovely. So, a back office. This is my favorite back office. Sad but true. This is Montreal. In Montreal, they have 9 separate operators of the public transport system. Together, they run 3,000 buses, 5 train lines, and 4 metro lines. What makes this my favorite is that they have one back office, not 19. And the 19 operators' sensitive data is kept separate and secure just for them. So they share a platform, but their sensitive data is secure only for them. What it means is they save money. All the data collected into that back office is in the same format, so it makes doing data analysis really easy. You haven't got to do any of this translation of data and trying to understand it. It's all in the same format, so easy to do. This is an example of some data analysis that my former company did in France. One of those Nancy, and one of them is Grenoble. I think the one on the right is Nancy. And all they did was they took information on where people joined the public transport network and where they left the public transport network. Repeat that a week later, a week later, a week later, and you identify new patterns of behavior. And it means that when you visualize that data analytics, that big data analysis, you can pick up new transport trends at a much earlier stage. You can see how things are changing. So it means that you're ahead of the game and you can provide services before the demand is really screaming out for it. So you can predict what people are wanting. In the introduction, Nick already mentioned that we helped set up the Mobility as a Service Alliance Europe a couple of years ago. It's to promote mobility as a service. It's got 4 work groups. I guess you've seen these yesterday. One on the single market, one on the end user perspectives, one on the legal framework and the incentives, and one on technical standards. So there's a lot of work going on, and a lot of people really working very hard to try and identify best practice for mobility as a service and identify how we can really make it work. So this is our friend Sampo's vision, and Sampo and I have lots of arguments. My main problem with Sampo's business model is that he wants to guarantee the level of service that he provides to his customers. Just before Christmas, I was going up to Birmingham from London Euston to attend a MaaS workshop. Just as the train was due to leave, the train manager said, "Terribly sorry, all trains out of Euston are held because somebody's jumped in front of a train 100 miles up the track." So thousands of people journeys were disrupted. We actually arrived in Birmingham about 2.5 hours late. So all of the trains going north, all of the trains coming south had that impact. So thousands and thousands and thousands of people's journeys were impacted by one uncontrollable event. I don't want to be guaranteeing people the quality of the service when that can happen. Or if the bus breaks down. It's too dangerous a business model. So what I prefer is a different approach. Now, one of the problems with travel is unless you know what you're doing, no, let me rephrase that. I'm in a room of really boring people. You all travel the same way. You park in the same places. You go to the same shops. You buy the same things. And you go home the same way. Unless somebody shows you a new way of doing it, you'll just carry on doing that. So let's assume that you're down here at the embankment and you want to go to Covent Garden. You can see there are two ways. Northern Line to Leicester Square, or this one. What's this one called? Jenny, what's this?
It's the Bakerloo line.
This is the Bakerloo line, okay? Up to Piccadilly. I can never remember that one. And that's what we do, yeah? Or step outside the station and you can walk from the embankment to Covent Garden in 8 minutes. And it feels like less walking than you do changing trains. But unless somebody tells you that and shows you that, you'll never know. You'll carry on doing what you've always done. So when we introduce a new system, it's really important to show people, this is new, this is what it can do for you. London Transport and London Underground have just produced tube maps with walking times. Doesn't help because it follows the tube line. So it would take you Charing Cross, Leicester Square, Covent Garden, which is not the direct route. So unless you know, you don't know. So this is a slide from Los Angeles, and it shows the explosion in mobility services. So how do you know what you don't know? How do you know this new service exists? And that's why I like the Denver model. Okay, maybe it wasn't perfect, but the concept behind it is you have a mobility marketplace, which sits here, with all the mobility operators can join. And like the Montreal model, their sensitive data is kept separate and secure for them. It should be bookable and all the rest of it. But what it gives these people, why would they join? It gives them access to customers. It gives them a launching platform. So if they're a new business, they can join that. And they will suddenly appear on people's searches. They don't have to do this huge advertising campaign. And it's a level playing field, so everybody is treated the same on it. So when you ask for the route, it doesn't matter if you're Lyft or Uber or some minibus that goes around some villages and then joins up with a hub. You'd all be treated the same to give the person asking for the route the best information. And for the people using it, they know all their options. They can have personalized analytics, and they get information on what's available, which before maybe they'd have to search around for. And for the cities, it gives them data analytics and an understanding and a better use of their transport systems. Now, one of the things that we need to introduce to this is, let's say they ask for a relatively environmentally friendly route. And it says, okay, you drive to this railway station, you use the train, and then you use this bus. If they're going to be the only person on the bus, that's less green than driving all the way. But unless we have that information, we can't put it into the equation. So the Internet of Things is going to be really crucial to make sure that what we're making our decisions on is sound and solid data and information. So there's more to be done. More to be done. This is an example of an authority being involved. SMERT. It sounds like a Bond villain, but it's actually a region of northern France, around the Nord-Pas-de-Calais. 14 transport authorities decided to work together, like they did in Montreal, because I should have said Montreal. It's not a clever back office. It's clever procurement that goes round and round, apparently. No? Okay. So in northern France, 14 of them decided to work together in order to give people better information on all the transport options available to them. I really want to do this, so give me a minute, please. I can skip some of the others later on. One of the challenges we've got at the moment is there's a limit to how much coffee and how many charity shops we want to visit all the time. So to keep our high streets as a buzzing place, we need to have a different approach. My wife decided the other day she needed a new DAB radio. So I said, what are you going to do, get it off the internet or go and look in a shop? She said, both, of course. I'll go and look in the shop, decide which one I want, and then I'll buy it off the internet. So maybe some of our shops need to become showrooms. So if we encourage people not to drive into the city centre, but to use some other form of transport, we should help them when they do their shopping. Because that's what people do, they shop. So what we need to do is have this ability to have people go in to a showroom, select what they want, and it's delivered from a central warehouse. Maybe it goes through a consolidation area so that the vehicles delivering it are more efficient. But we need to do something about the high street because otherwise it's just going to die. Everything that I've talked about policy can be summed up in this slide. So these are the policy drivers of the cities. It's about the economy, safety, social inclusion, increased mobility, the environment, accessibility for everybody, efficiency, health, quality of life, reliability, and jobs. This is what the cities care about. And putting these together with mobility as a service enables us to make more livable cities and regions. And I've got two quick other ones. Political leadership. Okay, I've been banging on about how the authorities should be involved. Well, sometimes they're not very good. I showed you my first car. This is my current car. It's a very fuel-efficient Land Rover Range Rover V8 diesel turbo, 4.4 litres. And we were encouraged to buy diesel vehicles because they're jolly good. And it is. I'm not a very good contender for car share because that's my dog, Sydney, and you can see what she would do. And that's one of my horses. But political leadership, if they say we've got these huge problems in the cities, don't rely on mobility as a service to solve it. You can solve it with congestion charging. You've already got the tools, you're just scared to use them. Mobility as a service will give you smaller tools that won't upset people quite as quickly. And finally, my last slide, if it was all so easy, why do we all own lawnmowers? How many people in the room have got a lawnmower? Okay. So why? You don't use it between October and March. You use it once a week between April and September. It depreciates. You have to store it. You have to maintain it. This is verging on the ridiculous. You could be part of the sharing economy. You could have the right machine for the right job. And you can have the mower you want when you want it. Thank you. Pleasure.
We'll take questions for Richard. We'll wrap that up in the closing panel. Our final formal speaker, we've heard a number of contributions from him already. Jack Opiola, Managing Partner and President of D'Artagnan Consulting, also an advisory board member of A2B, a world expert, I think, on road charging and tolls of all kinds, and the man who started out building and operating toll roads in Virginia, which means, I was going to say, I wrote down here, which means that anyone who has travelled from Washington, D.C. to Dulles Airport has almost certainly used the Dulles Greenway, which you helped to build. And I was going to say that, and then somebody pointed out that there are a lot of curmudgeonly people who won't use a toll road just because they have to pay, and they still use the boring, congested old roads. But anyway, you did your best. Jack Opiola.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, but I have to say, coming here to speak to this august group, I was quite cross-conflicted on a lot of the subjects to address for mobility as a service. But before I get into my presentation, I've got an administrative matter that I've been asked to present, and this is the winners from the A to B driving contest outside. And so I guess there were 3 stations, and the first Audi R8, the winner, or the best driver, was Andrew Pierce. The second, on the Pagani Zonda, was not only is he a guru of MaaS, but also a driving guru, because Sampo Hypeden was the one that was the winner on that one. So I guess he's not giving up a car. And on the Aston Martin, Rob Furlong was the winner. So if those 3 people, after the sessions this afternoon, can stop by to the A to B booth, there are rewards for your good driving. Okay, the mobility future. How do we get there? I really have to say I've been refreshed from many of the discussions today, because I felt yesterday was a little bit of the wonders of MaaS, and today was the realities of MaaS. And I'm probably going to continue that theme, but I'm going to take it back to core values. And I think probably the first thing is borrowing some inspiration from Albert Einstein. We can't solve tomorrow's problems with yesterday's techniques. We have to think out of the box. It's not that we want to be disruptive. We have to be disruptive if we're going to solve those problems in the future. We've heard from a number of speakers the urbanization of our world's population base. The fact that in about 2007 we were at the 50% mark, and by about 2030 we're going to be at 60% of the world's population in cities. So the growth is coming to our cities, but we can't forget about the suburbs and the rural areas. You know, I guess there was another famous British gentleman by the name of Sir Isaac Newton that talked about the fact that we can see further today because we stand on the shoulders of giants. And the people that came before us have helped make this MaaS market because they created the digital age. But we live today in a digital lifestyle that's connected. When we start talking about those customers, we start talking about the clients that we have, they live in a connected lifestyle. They already have connectivity in their everyday life, except when they get into the transport system. When they get in the transport system, what they expect to get, they don't get. At home, they can have their mobile life, their office, and their private data connected. But they can't really get that type of connectivity when they get into their transport system. You know, the vision, the supplier vision, the industry that's in the room, you know, they've given us a number of wonderful things and a great deal of integration. They want to carry that further. And they have the skills and the techniques and the people to make that a reality, as they've already demonstrated. So that transport future is going to be an integrated solution. It's going to connect everything in from those traffic management centers that go all the way down to the individual car, our life-saving systems for emergencies, and I think there is a role for autonomous vehicles that will fit our future, but it may be first our connected vehicles before it's the autonomous vehicles in our future. So connecting and holding this all together in the center, though, are these 3 parts. I remember in the early days of ITS, we described ITS like a 3-legged stool. And the stool will only stand if all 3 support legs are equally involved: government, public, and industry. And if we only take 2 of those legs, it's not a stable platform and it falls over. So we need those legs to play together nicely in order to give us our mobility. And of course, with more integration of data and open standards and open systems, we can make that mobility as a service. But I often see mobility as a service coming from the vendors, the suppliers, and industry. Of course they want a service. They want to sell us a service. But when I start looking at the fact that we have to balance all 3 legs, it's not going to be industry and public, or the stool's going to fall over. Government is involved. So maybe, and I throw this out there just as a tweak to say maybe it's going to be really mobility as a utility. And Nick, we can add a mobility as a utility initiative so that we can say it's Maui as opposed, so we don't have to worry about MaaS or MaaS in the future. But truly, you know, the service, the KPIs that I've seen creep up today on presentations need to be there in order to hold industry accountable to the public. Because when the services aren't provided or the services fall over, who does the public go to? I go to my elected official. Part of the reason we have a great deal of government intervention today is because years ago people were complaining about not having transport. So what did we do? We started public transport. It survived through to today. Is it the future? I don't know. There's a number of people that think that industry will replace that, but I don't think they can replace government's oversight and management of it. But maybe that management will be different. Rather than a TfL, somebody actually managing and operating it, it will be a government oversight. And when industry doesn't supply the services, their KPIs are to give refunds back to the public because they didn't get the value that what they invested for that trip. There are a lot of discussions today about private cars, yesterday about private cars ownership. But let's not forget that really today's society and our economies are built very much on those private cars. You may think that because of my accent, I'm saying that because that was the basis of the American economy, but I really consider myself a world citizen. I've lived more years out of the U.S. than I have in the U.S. And, you know, but in every case, the car has been the most democratic and socially equitable form of transport we've ever had. And actually, in today's society, where we now do away with gender inequality, it's the car that's provided a lot of that equality to women into the workforce. So let's not forget that the car has had its place. The question is not having it, but using it wisely. But we all know that demand always expands. And that's what I see also in MaaS, that as we make services less painful, as we use more and have more mobility, people are going to want to use it more, make more of those trips down to do comparisons, to find things in the shops. But there's going to be congestion in our public transport and congestion on our roads. That's something we're going to have to manage. And you know, here's a great indicator. This is something that we did in Los Angeles a long time ago, but we were looking at trips. And really the problem, rather than listening to Margaret and saying that we're going to limit how much travel you can do on a given month or a given week, that's a little bit excessive. But what we do have as a real problem is the fact that people don't live where they work. These are numbers coming out of the 3 counties in Los Angeles, and I suspect I would do the same thing if I was here in London and did the same map from Buckinghamshire, from South London. We would probably have people that live there and come into the city, and equally people that live in the city and go back out there. So, you know, the idea that in our major cities, this cross-current of movements is huge, and that in itself creates congestion. And, you know, I mean, here's some statistics that go back to back that up. I added these in only in case people wanted to have questions, but you're talking about people that for 5 or more days a week are using their car. They're actually traveling 4 days per week, 10% of the people. So 80% of the people in that diagram are doing that trip 5 days a week. Changing to a completely different area, household travel in Idaho. This is for the state, very rural state in the U.S. But what we did was we looked at trip patterns. And the trip patterns that we looked at urban, mixed, or that area just outside the urban center, and then the rural people. 2 things came out of this. One, there was a charge that the rural people travel greater distances in order to get their services, which is true on a single trip, but on a yearly basis, did about the same number of miles as the urban people. The urban people just did it in more shorter trips. And the mixed actually generate the largest number of trips because they're the ones least serviced by public transport. They can't walk to the hospital. They have to take other transport to get there. And when we start looking at the distribution of that travel, we have to start thinking of it in zones, the distance. There's the city zone, and a lot of the work that we're talking about in MaaS is all in that urban city zone, because it's not, when we start looking at the suburbs, the options start getting thinner, and then when you get to the inner city or the rural areas, they get thinner. And some of the powertrains that we're talking about, obviously a movement to alternate fuels and electricity, but there's a lot more options for getting around in the city that may be personal mobility than there are for when you start talking about the outside. And, when we start talking about winning the hearts and minds, this is really hard. This is just a sampling of what shows up on the newsstand as you're waiting for your train. And, what do we have? ITS International writes an article on MaaS. That's one magazine that's not even out on that newsstand. And we're competing with people that are associating substance food with drives like sex with cars. I mean, isn't that what we sell cars with, or what Detroit and other automotive people? Look at the headlines on these. The world's best sedan, the coolest 911 ever. So when we start trying to sell public transport mobility as a service, boy, our marketing has to step up 2 or 3 notches to compete with this. But we're here to say, how do we pull all these pieces together? And I think there's, we talked this morning about payments, bookings, journey planning, but what we're not talking a lot about is those transfer points and near real-time updates, because that information isn't very useful to me if I show up on my booking and the train I was going to get on is now 30 minutes late, and I've got a 30-minute delay that's been put into my schedule. Or the fact that I'm expecting to go outside to catch my bus, but because of an incident and accident, the bus isn't running. Or the train, because of maintenance and repair, isn't making that trip. Or as the incident that you described, stops the train altogether. So now I've got to look at an alternate. And so much of this, I think, is how powerful is our near-time information to provide updates to users and user information. That's far more valuable to the individual than the trip schedule that is printed. But that having been said, there's a lot of commercial opportunities here. I mean, in a customer-driven world, the conveniences and the options that are available to them, and this is, but it's making it a value-rich proposition. And I think somewhere behind value-rich means it has to be a savings. I mean, some of the things that we've seen work in the world, some of the things that we see work today, are those things that provide savings to the individual, not higher cost. So if I'm combining a trip with a discount to buy my coffee, probably will get used more than somebody that doesn't offer that discount. The providers, I think, one of the reasons we believe strongly that providers will be industry is because of their flexibility in contracting and for establishing relationships and deals. Government is terrible at that. Government's way of doing it is dictating it and moderating it and saying, you will do this. But industry can turn out and work with a parking garage and say, those other 30 slots that you'd never really sell, what if I filled those for you? How much is that worth, and how much discount will you give me? How much discount can I pass on to my customers? So using your car and then parking in that car park gets you a 10% discount if you run it through that service provider. That's a powerful incentive. Again, retailers are looking for deals because in today's world we've got a glut of information, and if they can get coupled up with a provider, they see a great way in order to sell their services. And of course, government, if we can decrease subsidies to transportation, make transportation a utility, make it self-standing, rather than constantly being on the budget, that money could be better used in other areas, such as health, education, and welfare. And, these partnerships, revenue sources, collaboration, actually a new word, Nick, you'll probably pull me apart on this one, is coopetition. Because these vendors don't like to play nicely, they like to eat each other. But if they can collaborate collectively and share information, they can still compete, but in a friendly, collaborative fashion. And of course, the services. And, we do have worldwide examples. I think many times we make this industry comparable to the mobile phone industry, and I think that's the wrong one. I think we should look at the airline industry. They've run a lot of their end-to-end services. I didn't buy my ticket through United to come here. I went through one of the aggregators. I went through Travelocity or Kayak to look at who gave me the best deal. They offered me the hotel. They offered me the trip on the tube or on the Paddington Express as part of just an incentive to say, we'll give you a discount on that ticket if you buy it through us. They've combined a lot of the mobility aspects into one single service. Logistics works the same way. I put logistics on here because it's been brought up in a few of the earlier speeches, but I'm also bringing it up for back office because logistics are now getting into blockchains. And for people that don't really know what blockchains are, it's a way of taking the transaction and automatically breaking it up into its component pieces. So if I'm shipping something from Hong Kong to Los Angeles, at the time that it gets delivered to the dock in Hong Kong and the manifest is signed, payment is released to the manufacturer that it's been delivered. When it's on the boat, they actually monitor the boat going across Pacific, get progress payments to the shipper for the boat reaching Los Angeles. And then when it gets offloaded onto the carrier and the carrier delivers it to the warehouse, that manifest in the transaction gets paid. And all of that's one transaction, all reconcilable against itself, and each piece is individually broken out so that everybody gets their fair share of it. That stops, if you think about it, all of the intermediate reconciliations that we have today, that what do? They add cost and overhead. It makes it extremely streamlined and effective, and you're seeing the industry, including the banking industry, moving this way. I put Singapore up here because, one, I'm familiar with it, and two, I don't know that they say they have MaaS, but if I was there, I would swear they have MaaS because I can use my bank card and get any mode of transport. I can find information out on my phone. I've never been caught in stepping out of one mode into the next. Ticketing has never been an issue. And yet I don't know we would qualify them for MaaS, but yet they have a very sophisticated payment system, and it all goes back to the banks. Secondly, Singapore for individual car owners has road charging, and they're changing to distance-based road charging. So that means the value of my trip is actually given to me on each individual trip. So I know the cost of that private car trip. And I can also book my parking and reserve that and pay for it all at the same time. Much like Portugal. Portugal has had a very sophisticated system, very good micro-payment system within Portugal, done by Brisa, now A to B. But the problem with it has been it's been tied to the transponder on the car, so it was the car trip. So the car trip, it took care of your tolls, could take care of your parking, could take care of your access. Also provided if you were going by fast food and buying fast food, it could be read and put onto your account. So one bill. The problem, though, it was tied to the car. Now they're changing that to connect that back to your mobile phone so when you left the car, you could still use the same system to get one bill. But because they've perfected how to do low-cost transactions as an intermediary, they can now grow that system. And I guess that's one of the things that we may need to do as we transition to MaaS, is look at getting early small wins that are the bedrock of the system, payment systems, the part of the information, and not try to do it all in one swallow. Take it in smaller bites, but continually take bites out of it in order to add on top of the service. And that's where I think the people in Portugal have done it extremely well. Challenges, we've had a lot of discussion about challenges. I borrowed this from the graphic from Xerox. But when you look at that graphic, you see that that car trip in time is 16 minutes. And then my second option is 37 minutes. And then if I walk, take the bus, walk, take the bus, walk, that's 51 minutes. That's a tough decision to make. I think I'm in my car. That's 16 minutes. And I know a lot of people question why have the car or the lawnmower, but the car and the lawnmower, I mean, it's my backup. When the rest of the system fails, my safety net is that car. If I was stuck because the train was canceled, maybe I use my car to go up to the meeting and I still get there on time. So, you know, and connected autonomous vehicles down the bottom, listening to the first presentation, I think they can do a lot to sweat our asset. In other words, we can compress space, we can put more cars on the road. I do believe they have to be shared. I think a lot of companies are going to shared ideas for their cars. Volkswagen in their initial offering aren't offering some super sexy sports car. They're offering the old throwback of the VW bus because they say it's going to be shared. And I think a lot of automotive companies are moving that way. And things like Uber Pool are going to take us there. That share riding that we saw in the example from Lisbon, I think, is important. But the last one I want to bring up, because nobody has mentioned this. We talked value before, but we were talking about it in dollars and cents. What about value of time? What about and I don't mean it from an economic sense. I mean value from the point that I have a friend in Melbourne. She and her husband live in North Melbourne. They take the car to work. It takes them, without congestion, 30 minutes, with congestion, about 45 minutes to get down into the city. Her husband has calculated that's $86 because he used an economic analysis of wear and tear on the car, part of the insurance, maintenance of the car, plus the fuel. The train only cost them 16 Australian. But, and I said, so it's a no-ringer. You take the train. He said, no, we drive. I said, wait a minute, with that cost difference, why do you drive? And the answer was, because in the evening, even if it takes me 45 minutes to get home, the bus takes me an hour and 15 minutes. And the 30 minutes difference means all the difference in the world to me in the evening. That allows me to go to yoga classes. It means that we decide to go to dinner. It means that we get together with friends. But on the nights they take the train and get home, they go to their apartment, have dinner, get ready for the next day. So the value of that time savings is extremely important. Now, maybe that's an extreme example. I don't want to hold it up as the prime example, but how many of our cases are getting into the actual value of time? What do people think of that time? And all of us have values of time, rich or poor. It's not a rich man's game, because even the poor, and they get penalized the most. The best example I can give is tolls in Los Angeles on the SR 91, and the tolls can be as much as $25. To a poor family, that's a huge amount of money. But if they put their children into child care service and they have to pick them up, if they're even 5 minutes late, it costs them $20. So there's a trade-off there. And it's better to get there on time. If they use the toll road, they get there on time. One of the things I think that's the elephant in the room is that people only recognize what costs come out of their pocket. While I gave you that example of the people from Australia, most people will only recognize what money is actually coming out of my pocket. So I pay a toll, I pay a parking, that's the cost of the trip. I may ascribe some amount of money to the fuel, but since I may fill up once a week or a more efficient car once every 2 weeks, I don't really put that on the individual trip. I think to make MaaS work, we're really going to have to take a hard look from our decision makers and from our societies to push road usage charging or charging people, and then the cost of the trip is right in their face. It's part of the cost of the trip, and now I've got options that truly push me out of my car and use it responsibly. Without it, I don't know that it happens. As much as I'd like to say that all the information we provide them is great, and I've been in this industry for years, and I always felt that the more information we give people, the better we are, the better decisions we can make. But reality is, it still comes down to a cost. And if I think that car trip is less expensive, I'm going to make it. Again, going back to that same example from Idaho, we looked at this. We also looked at what would be the change of the payments. And what we found was that urban drivers would end up paying a month about $4 more, and rural drivers would be actually saving $2 with a road usage charge. So the rural-urban argument is really quite a myth. So then the question is, we as practitioners, we as implementers of MaaS, do we try to make things easy on ourselves, or do we try to make things easy for our customers, whoever they may be? It's a good question, but I think at the heart of it is something that I just read that came out of Australia, and the Minister, Andrew Constance from Sydney, sees technology and on-demand services and big data powering private enterprises to basically abolish timetable services and government-supplied vehicles. In other words, he sees a complete transformation of public transport going to demand management vehicles. The vehicles he's talking about, he further explains, are shared vehicles run by companies, running on demand, and he sees that happening in the next 10 to 15 years, and that everything in the transport side will be privatized. And I think that's our option. If we can't make this work, this is going to happen. I actually, this is one of the times I agree with Andrew that this is something that's going to happen. Private industry and convenience with the customer may take it over, and then we as government have to find out, is that role now obsolete, or is that role the manager of that utility? And I think that's a serious question we all have to take. Thank you.
Jack, thank you very much indeed. Can I invite our other closing panel members to come up? That's Hans Arby, Martin Roos, and Andy Taylor. And while they're coming up, I will just say one of the things you talked about there at the very end, Jack, but which you also mentioned earlier, was this notion of government no longer getting in the game of providing services, but of franchising them out. And we, of course, in this country have tried that with rail franchising, and I think it's fair to say that the jury is still out on whether there has been an improvement. But let's try to pull the threads of these 2 days together, which is not going to be easy, and we've got about 25 minutes to do it. So, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 very distinguished gentlemen there, all wearing their suits and ties. So this is going to be a bit of a canter. But there's a fundamental question, or a number of fundamental questions. One that you raised at the very end: should governments be in the business of providing transport in this environment? Should government-controlled bodies be in this business? Should we have organisations like TfL going forward? We know what you think, Jack. What does everybody else think? Hans, very quickly. Very quickly, please.
Yeah, well, there are two different types of transport in big cities. You should separate destination-based or direction-based. In central, dense part of cities, you need mass transit that can't be solved by self-driving cars. So that's almost like an infrastructure. But for the rest, that is very expensive for public transport to run. Rural areas or semi-dense areas, will be better alternatives. But you will have both, I think.
Martin?
I think there's a clear role for government. So it's a clear yes. And I think also what Jack has mentioned, I think for me it's more the pricing schemes to come to a kind of a full cost model in transport in the end. I think this is a long-term perspective on how we plan. So actually we plan and price our infrastructure, but in the European scheme that we have for tolling, I think it's not appropriate for incorporating also with the services then. I think we need new planning paradigms on the long term. So start with the users, start with the services, and then see on what kind of pillars of infrastructure, operations, vehicles, assets you need, and how to access them and how to price them in the end. I think that will be crucial, but to set up the scene and also to control it somehow in cities as well as in the rural countryside, it will be a governmental job.
Andy?
I think that sort of regulation and oversight, definitely. I agree. It's that there needs to be sort of more hands-off management of the actual sort of public transportation systems. But I'd rather see them let the sort of commercial enterprises actually sort of deliver the services and they just regulate it. I'd like to see them sort of strip out a bit more layers between the regulation side and actually getting to the point of delivering the technology, because the procurement loop at the moment is far too bloated.
Dan?
The history of transport is one of private ownership. I tell my Columbia students their forebears built the New York City subway and owned it. It was a subway up in the air, it was a subway down on the ground. It took over for privately owned horse-drawn carriages. But since the beginning of transport time, it's been a privately owned thing, and I don't know why it has to go, why it cannot go back to that. The subway, as an example, had to go public because there was the price of the fare was constrained to a nickel, and it became grossly unaffordable.
Richard?
Obviously, I think there's a role for both government and private sector to work together. What I would want is the government, the politicians, to have a bit more courage. The only thing that I can guarantee is that every time a Minister of Transport in this country becomes an ex-Minister of Transport is when he announces the real solution for our transport situation is road user charging. But he only says it once he's left office.
Can I add one thing here? We're all familiar with the meme TOD, transit-oriented development. But if we actually had a paradigm of transit-owned development, where they're actually, much like the MTR, which is actually a real estate company that owns a subway in Hong Kong, that might be actually a better model.
Jack, you want to come in again? You were twitching. I thought you wanted to respond.
No, I just, I certainly believe that government is involved. I think that third leg of the stool has to be there. But it's oversight, setting the KPIs, managing the services that should be delivered, and taking care of enforcement when they're not.
Yeah. I asked the panelists before this to email me a series of suggestions about questions that we might talk about, and they all did, for which my thanks. I'm going to cherry pick one or two of them, and there's a sort of overarching. We've heard a lot about bundling, usually in the form of some sort of app. We've heard a lot about the practical issues that raises about payments and reconciliation and ticketing and all that kind of thing. Is bundling inevitably the way forward in every case for MaaS? And what, very quickly, are the pitfalls? And I'm going to start at that end with Richard.
I think joining up services, different modes, is really important. So whether that's in a bundled package, I guess it has to be really. We have to join up the services and enable people to use them easily. So that includes Jack's pain points about interchanges. So I think, supporting people throughout a journey in a bundled way is good.
Daniel?
If it isn't basically point-to-point service, i.e., which I was talking about carpooling, because there is no transit to work with, I think that the rider is much better off, quite frankly, getting that expediency of time that actual transit can actually provide in many cases. Some cases it doesn't. Some cases, it's not worth getting off the car to get onto the bus. But certainly if it's the train, it may be a whole different case.
Yeah. Andy?
Yes, you have to bundle. Multimodal sort of operations are the only real way to go. And when I say multimodal, I mean public and private transportation networks. Whether we actually sort of bundle those as a single price that you're going to buy on a subscription on a monthly basis, I can't see that one coming for several years. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to sort out before we get there.
Dan?
I think bundling is absolute. I think the company, and again, I'm looking at this as private industry, and trying to put things together, is going to have to bundle in order to make their business case. I think it's too hard to make the business case on a single application. But if I can bundle several things together, I'm now taking a part or a cut of several operations that are coming in. Even if I'm just a transaction processor, the more money I can transact, I'm taking the same 25% or 0.25% on the transaction. So the bigger the number, the more profit for me. And so I want to run as much as I can through my bundled services. But the key to them, I think, is that they have to pass on some savings or discounts to the other applicant and keep them interested in the bundle.
Mm-hmm. Martin?
I think bundling is, towards the customer, is an important thing to be understandable for on the customer perspective. So, and also that you could calculate with specific costs and pricing models that you really understand. Because if you're getting too complex and you have a trip chain or an element by element pricing scheme, I think it's too complicated. So it's what's needed in behind is it must be transparent for all actors participating. And the thing with the, let's say, a kind of a bundling fee, I would rather go for a kind of a wholesale pricing model in transport also, because this is the potential revenue of the marketplaces. And the marketplaces, there will be hopefully many different ones outreaching to the real customer needs. And so I think it's with the different pricing models in behind, but the bundling on the customer level is quite important.
Hans?
Wow, this is a big one. Bundling will be important for many segments, but actually running a MaaS service, you actually compete on two sides. One is car ownership, the other one is people putting together the everyday travel by themselves. It's like if you're in the vacation travel business, people use all-inclusive charter or they pick up them together. So it's going to be different for different people. Thing with bundling is actually convenience, and convenience is much, much more important than the price. Convenience is the guarantee that you will be there, that somebody is going to take care of you, timing issues and everything. But you also have to know that each individual service has to be of high quality. When you say the train isn't good, no, that train line isn't good. People will never go to a MaaS supplier if it's built on bad services. So we need to look, the better the services that we bundle, the better the offer will be. So looking at public transport, it has to be better in many respects. But if I'm as a professional buyer and reseller of public transport, I will have much, much more power towards the public transport authorities than each individual traveler.
Okay, thank you all very much for that. We might come back to some more general questions in a minute, but let me just see whether there is anyone in the hall who wants to come back. We have this stellar array of expertise and experience on the podium. I can't believe that nobody has any more questions. Yes, sir. Well done, sir. Down here, sir. Microphone is on its way to you.
I'm going to be a bit controversial here,
good.
because once upon a time, when I worked in the real estate world, and we used to be a trend to sort of teleworking and tele-cottages and things like that. The idea was you didn't necessarily need to live in cities, and I used to run a virtual business, by the way, and I still work from home, by the way. Perhaps some of the problem would be better if we didn't have to go and trundle into one enormous city every day and actually had a more devolved way of working across the country.
Anyone want to come back on that? Richard?
I've been working from home for the last 7-8 years. I thought it's because they didn't like me. They didn't give me a desk when I joined the company. But I love it. But I find that it doesn't reduce my travel, it just changes it. I go to Waitrose every day, do a bit of shopping, get a nice loaf. So it doesn't reduce my travel, it just changes it.
I get it delivered.
I like to choose.
Yeah, I actually was involved with some studies in the US that dealt with telecommuting when it was introduced. And what we found was that, yes, for 2 or 3 days a week, could work from home. But on the off days, I had to go back in and meet with meetings into the office. And then what people did was chain multiple trips. What we ended up with, there was actually more trips on the days that they traveled because they packed more into that day than they did from the days they were sitting at home.
You mentioned delivery, and let me just ask another general question of all our panelists. Once or twice during the past day and a half, 2 days, people have mentioned freight and goods and so on. Does an economically viable MaaS system really need to include freight, both long distance and short distance, delivery to the home and so on? Or does that make achieving a viable system just ridiculously complicated? Does it make it too difficult? Or do the wins from including freight and goods, do they outweigh the costs and disadvantages? Hans?
Well, it could be, but you have to focus on the mobility. If you can add on, you can have marketing, cooperation, and so on. But if you want to have MaaS working, there's a number of things that has to be in place in a city if you want to have many customers. Good public transport, good city planning, there are services for home delivery and so on. Then it's a good city for MaaS. So it's all about trying to offer the city as a whole and as a MaaS provider an easy everyday life without having to own a car. And MaaS is just one, so to say, the grease for making this easier for 20-30% of the population. It's not the solution for everything.
But Martin?
From the concepts, and I think also from the technologies, yes, they should be in, but not from the implementation, then because you overcomplicate it, yeah? And you're embracing another sector that has its problem of its own. So I think logistics and freight, they have to find solutions for long-term haulage as well as city logistics.
What about
but the systems and the solutions will be different than those with MaaS.
Yeah.
And also the ecosystem thinking, of course, is important there, but the ecosystem is a totally different one.
I just throw this out, but generally, in thinly populated rural areas where providing reasonably comprehensive transport options is quite difficult, if you bundle in freight and passenger, maybe that makes it easier. Jack, sorry.
Yeah, I think that if I were implementing a MaaS system, I would not include freight. I think freight's being taken care of by themselves. I think they do a very good job of, making their ecosystem MaaS-like already. And so, I couldn't see putting it into this. I think the biggest thing where it gets mentioned is both as an example to follow, and secondly, we're competing. I mean, all modes are competing on the same road space. And that's where I think pricing comes in to be an extremely important aspect. And you see that here in London, how many trucks are offloading and restocking at night because they don't want to pay the charge during the day. And the people that are there in the day are the ones that have to be there because people have said, I need this package by 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. And so the FedEx and the UPS and, they're all out on the street at that time, adding to the congestion, adding to take road space away from moving people.
Though generalizing from my own experience, which is always, of course, dangerous, but I began this 2 days by saying I was on the brink of getting rid of my car. One of the reasons why it's feasible to get rid of the car is that I use it a lot for going to the supermarket, but actually supermarkets come to me now, and that's one factor. Andy?
So we did a study for TfL. We had a bit of an innovation day because we wanted to try and take some of the white vans off the road in sort of London because they're running about sort of 38% occupancy for the loads. So it's a complete sort of waste of the road space they were actually using. So we came up with a whole bunch of ideas like using the London Underground, you're putting sort of carriages on there and taking them off, using sort of the overrail, using some of the bus passengers, doing co-located, TfL putting up a service for the last mile delivery. And we went through all of them, we did the analysis, and the biggest blocker was the lawyers. It was basically, well, that's not going to fly because the insurance on this is going to be astronomical, or that's not going to work because. So it's a case of, that's, I think it's a great idea if you can sweat the assets more and you can sort of put logistics in there, but it's not going to happen for a hell of a long time. It's a case of, let's just try and figure it out and see how it works for the squidgy human beings first, and then it's a case of we can worry about sort of freight afterwards.
Daniel?
Freight, at least in the United States, is one of the economically tightest organizations out there, and one of the most efficient, literally, per dollar per mile carried. It would be hard to see where they would see any incentive whatsoever to try to commingle trip purposes, to essentially, I have some people in the car and I've got some boxes in the car. Who do I deliver first? It's not in their economic model to actually really do that. Well, one of the things they can do, this is something we suggested actually for New York, is allow small vehicles, for instance, to use some things like parkways, etc., which would conceivably allow us to get rid of large trucks running relatively empty again in neighborhood streets and the like, because in order to be able to get to where they need to go. And obviously, large trucks are diesel-based, small vans are gas-based, so you have all kinds of health outcomes that get dramatically improved with those downsizing vehicles. And you'd charge them a medallion. You want to run on the parkway, you have an RFID medallion to basically say, okay, you're good, you're legit. The van that goes by, the white van that doesn't have that on there, I have your license plate. You'll get a nice souvenir in the mail.
I think it's easier to do it with freight and logistics, although I just call it shopping myself. Because all of that freight and logistics is just somebody buying something and somebody selling it to somebody else. Okay, there's different scales, but they're really good at cutting their costs until it gets to the final delivery, and then they're rubbish. So there's a real opportunity for the industry to get more organised and improve their final delivery drops.
Okay, I have one other question I want to put to the debate. Jack, sorry.
No, I'm not quite sure. This is something that I've just observed from my time that I lived in London and working with the EU. What is it with white vans? I'm sorry. I don't get this. If we want to switch people from trips, and some of those trips are to stores like you to pick up your groceries, who delivers those groceries but those white vans?
Yeah, what we need, Jack, is a driverless white van. The problem with the white van is not the white van, it's the guy.
When we did Manchester, the other half of those white vans were tradesmen. And I'm sorry, when I want a plumber, I want the plumber to come, not just look at the problem and say, oh yes, I'll be back in 2 weeks and fix that leak. If he has his van, he has his torch, he has his pipe, he has his tools with him. He doesn't carry those on the tube. He doesn't walk several miles with those or pull them with a cart. He takes his white van because it's his toolbox, it's his supplies, so he can fix the leak immediately and then be off. And if we don't do that, then we start talking about restraint of trade for tradesmen, and I don't think we want to do that.
No. I don't think anyone's suggesting that. Right. I have one other general question I want to put, but I'm keen to see if there's a question over here. Anybody else want in? Yep, down there as well, and over there. So 3 contributions from the floor.
I can't believe you did that study.
Yep.
Oh, so I was going to wait for you to go first.
Perfect.
Hi, Andrew Pearce from Jacobs Consultancy. Coming back to something that's been mentioned over the last 2 days, not so much this afternoon, but it's an overarching theme. Why are we doing this? The demands for this been cited over and again about air quality, congestion, but also that people want it, the demand for it by millennials, by Generation X, Generation Y. My question is, do we have good, solid evidence that when those people are older, that they will still want it when they're not living next to work, when they have children, etc., and indeed that the people who come after them, Generation Z, etc., will want this too? Or is it to do with the fact that they're young?
It's to do with the fact, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Okay, yeah. Who wants to go first on that?
I mean, if it's a question of generation or age, that's a good one. We will know that in 50 years. But I think you see a big shift. I was thinking about, we're sitting like, what are we, 50 plus men here speculating about how next generation going to use mobility. That's kind of not that representative, perhaps. there is a change. In the same way that people adopted using cars, there is a status change, of course, when living in big cities, or even older people use less cars. So it's urbanization will drive that. The car marking freedom of owning a car, using a car in a dense city is not freedom. So that will change.
Yeah, there's a big curb on freedom, of course, which is children. I could survive without a car when I was young, and I can survive without a car now. But when I had children, boy, that would have been a struggle. Jack,
but it's easier to live in urban areas with kids without owning a car. We had a couple of, when our test pilots, there were actually one, we put away cars that tried to live without car, and some wanted to test, do we need a car now when we have kid? And I mean, that was just, it wasn't millions of users, but in a way, but people really questioned, do I need a car? 30 years ago, I have a kid, I buy a car. You didn't even think about it. So that's a change.
But the thing is also this kind of, coming back to the freedom, I think it's more the freedom of choice, and the freedom of choice, not the freedom of ride my specific car on a specific highway or whatever. And I think it's not only going for the cities might be the wrong way. Maybe it's the millennials that we have to start with, but we have to, let's say, also look for other groups and or target groups that we can incorporate in this structure. But the millennials, of course, come first. Maybe the second group might be the elderly, especially in the rural areas, because they're underserved with their mobility needs maybe in the future, because no grocery stores or whatever are there anymore. So how do we organize this also from the social standpoint? So it is better to bring them their food, or should they have the possibility to go out and interact with others? And mobility should be the key, that this should be provided to those people also in the rural countrysides.
Yeah.
So I think, but this is our way on how we organize mobility in the future. But
Jack?
A number of times over the last couple of days, we've talked about millennials, and I think they may be also the most misunderstood generation. They're our largest generation we've ever had on the planet. It used to be the baby boomers. They've exceeded those. They're the largest unemployed generation. Because of that unemployment, most of them are not living on their own. If they're living in packs of 2 or 3 or 4 and combining in order to save on the rent. Or they're living back, they're what we refer to as boomerangs and living back at home, and then they don't need a car because they're borrowing dad's car and mom's car. They have the services provided by the family. So, there's a lot of things we keep saying about the millennials, but I think we really need to analyze them, because what we have seen out of the statistics is, yes, no, they're not interested in a car when they're 18 or a driver's license, but as they start being engaged socially, getting married, they are then taking on cars and houses, and it's just that they're saving over that period of time so that they can make that investment, because that investment is much larger than when we were at their age.
Okay, Andy?
I really like the idea as feral packs of millennial
It's terrifying,
students.
isn't it?
You don't want to live next door.
Wielding their smartphones dangerously, yes. Tangling you up in their beards.
No, I think the sort of tagging people as millennials and those are the people we're going to go after is a misnomer in some ways. I think the sort of key point we should be looking at is basically just improving mobility for everybody, give everybody equal access to it. Yeah. If you want to use a car, use a car. If you don't want to use a car, mobility as a service will be there. Whether or not it's a simple pay-as-you-go solution or whether or not it's sort of subscription-based, it's going to be down to the user at the end of the day. I think what we mentioned about the sort of the elder generation and having the mobility, I think there is going to be a big uptake as people sort of want to move away from their cars as they get older, and personally can't wait to have that conversation with my mother to try and keep death off the roads. So it's a case of
good luck with that. Yeah. Okay, quick questions, quick answers. One over here and then one I think at the back. Yeah.
Is it on?
Yeah. Yep.
I think the problem with the millenniums sitting here in this audience, we've been curling parents. We are doing too much for those kids. We're not letting them try on their own, and that's been going on for a generation. So we are the ones who are to be blamed. We just spoiled those kids.
Is that it? Is that your question?
No, my question is, how many years are we going to meet and say that we are still working to go for the next pilot? Who is going to present the first winning commercial solution that has a staying power? And I want to know when it's going to happen, year, and the city or region that is going to be the winner.
Okay, those are difficult questions to ask. Park that question, come back to that in a second. And yes, from the back. Yeah, microphone on its way to you.
Hi, Peter from Travel AI. Obviously, MaaS is a technology-driven movement, but we also heard Richard saying that data was important and so on. Is the assumption that the data will just come with the technology, or are there gaps now? And if there are gaps now, how will they be filled?
Okay, that's two questions, one about data and this very broad brush question, when, where, how, and I have another question that I want you all to answer as well, very, very quickly, please, in all of these. Is this the cure for congestion, or could it make it worse? Let's start with Richard on all three questions.
It can be the cure for congestion, but it needs policy input as well as private sector operations. Data is always the key to any ITS system. There are huge gaps at the moment. One of the big challenges is access to data that private companies have collected and regard as their own. If we're going to unlock the community-wide benefits, we need to get access to that data for the community to do stuff with it as well. What was the third bit? Oh, 2 years. 2 years.
2 years, right. You heard it here first, 2 years. Daniel.
Yeah, 2 years, and I don't know where. If I did, I wouldn't tell you.
Daniel?
Right. We're already seeing significant congestion. In fact, the New York Times ran an article about Uber and Lyft essentially totally clogging up Midtown Manhattan. So my answer is, with drivers in the car, yes, congestion is going to get a lot worse. If we get drivers out of the car, we could reduce the vehicle fleet by 75%. Now, those vehicles may be driving a heck of a lot more, but there's a lot less of them. So I don't think we'll see those cars essentially contributing to extra congestion. So I think it's going to come down. As far as who's it going to be, that was one of my questions. I have no idea. You saw all those players. It could be any one of them. Wall Street will eat them all alive and spit some of them out.
Yeah. Hans, who's it going to be? It's going to be you, isn't it? It's going to be in Sweden.
That's right.
Or is it that simple?
No, but of course you talk about MaaS readiness index and so on. It's of course some cities or societies it's easier to set it up. One thing is all other pieces in place. Like we have a very deregulated society in Sweden. We have deregulated taxi and so on. And if I'm in a city and I talk about this total offer, taking care, responsibility, service levels, and we say, what happens if the train doesn't come? And we say, then we send a taxi. And some cities say, no, there are no taxis because it's a regulator. It takes an hour to get a taxi. So there's a lot of things that has to be in place. So some cities might be better.
Cure for congestion?
Congestion, but the answer was us, of course, and Sweden, yeah. Congestion, yes, but that's up to cities. You have to begin policing, governance. You have to have dynamic charging so you don't clog the cities with self-driving cars and so on. So the cities need to really learn how to govern things instead of controlling or running things. And that's, I don't know, that's a big question.
Okay. Martin, quick answers. Congestion, cure for congestion?
Of course, as MaaS is about getting prices right in mobility, it will help. This is question number one. Data, of course, access is key, but it's not free data, but it's not only governmental data or operator data, it's also private company data, and we have to establish this kind of somehow fair competition towards also having a common customer base or customer view. So it's not only operational data, it's also information about your users that you share. And third, of course, Vienna, because there's a lot of pilots already. Not only pilots. We have systems up and running.
Okay.
So there is a multimodal service in Austria running now since several years, and the city of Vienna will bring their service in operation in, I think it's May or June, where they really launch it as a MaaS service. But it will deal a lot with companies and corporations and incorporate their fleet management, for instance, in a MaaS context.
Andy, quick answers.
Yes, it'll solve capacity, but you've got to regulate it. Data is absolutely critical, but there's an education needed. People are sitting on data thinking they're sitting on an oil well and they're going to get rich off it. You're not going to get rich if you just sort of put your arms around it and say it's all mine. At the same instance, asking for data from commercial companies, there's lessons to be learned. Don't ask for all the data, just ask for the data that's pertinent for you to make the right decisions more than anything else. So you've got to be a bit smarter about it. As to who's going to sort of get MaaS first, Sydney next year, Chicago 2 years after that, and London when we figure out what mobility is the services for London 3 years after that.
Cure for congestion?
Absolutely.
Jack?
I think we do make the assumption that as technology increases, we're going to get more data because we live in a digital world. But while we are getting more data, it's access to the data. And I think that's one of our biggest problems to solve, is not allowing vendors, suppliers to lock down data. Yes, commercial data can be protected, but other data has to be released underneath the services in a utility format that's part of the service that they're providing, part of what they give back to government. As far as congestion, pricing is probably the only way that I see that we're going to solve that. But every time we talk pricing, we always talk about a package of measures, and I think we should stop saying package of measures and say MaaS. Because I think MaaS is that package of measures that goes with it, because you're telling somebody we're going to price you out of your car trip, but I'm giving you options in which to take. And so I think the two go hand in glove. As far as when and where, I'll defer to others on that, but I will say that we are running road usage charge trials in the US, and that package of measures being provided by commercial account managers in Washington, Vancouver, British Columbia, and Hawaii. I think you should keep an eye on those, because I think you're going to see packages of measures or value-added services there. And going back to the other question back here, yes, we probably are too kind and gentle to our children, but that's unconditional love.
All right, on that very upbeat note, let's bring this to a halt. Let me say thank you to our panelists and to all our speakers and to you. Let me say I found it absolutely fascinating as someone who is not a transport expert. I have, not a transport expert, not an expert in anything, certainly not really knowledgeable about transport. I sense that this is a topic which people will be talking about and implementing for a long time. I suspect there is unquestionably an appetite, apart from anything else, for more conferences like this. I will take away all sorts of impressions and observations. One that I will say is that I think it's remarkable how the approaches to this issue across the Atlantic and in Europe reflect the different positions that the two societies start from. In the United States, they start with a car, and in Europe, they start with public transport. And what you think MaaS means depends very much on which of those two positions you start from. And the other thing is, as someone who does a number of these business conferences, may I say what a delight it has been to have held a 2-day-long discussion about business, about trade, about technology, about European regulation, and so on, and not once has somebody mentioned Brexit. Thank God. I'm going to hand over now to Colin Snowman for a few final words, and after he has spoken, there is a cup of tea outside.
Ladies and gentlemen, I won't keep you more than a moment or two, but I just want to say a heartfelt thanks. Thank you to you on behalf of ITS International. to all of you who have attended and supported and even sponsored MaaS Market. I hope you found it a valuable and worthwhile use of 2 days. The feedback that we've had so far has been extremely positive, and as a result, I can announce that we are already planning to have a follow-up MaaS conference here in Marsat in February 2018. So more news on that as we roll on. Further comments on this event would be welcome, and shortly you'll receive an email with a feedback form if you would kindly fill it in and return it to us, because your opinions really matter. I've already announced and told you that we're going to be looking at MaaS. We're going to have a dedicated section in ITS International in each issue. So whatever you get up to when you go out of here, please do let me know about it. And finally, thank you again to the organisers, from the organisers to the sponsors, the delegates, the supporters, and a big thank you to Nick Hyam, who's been a fantastic moderator for us. Have a safe journey home. We look forward to seeing you back here in 2018. And that's it from me and all the MaaS Market team, and tea is served. Thank you.